Welcome back to another edition of the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum podcast. Today we're visiting with Doug Green, better known as Ranger Doug of the Western group Riders in the Sky. Doug's book Singing in the Saddle has been widely read by Western music fans around the world. The band's recent performance at the National Cowboy Museum drew a sellout crowd.
Thank you for joining us for another podcast from the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum. Tonight we have with us Ranger Doug from the musical group Riders in the Sky. Good to have you again, Ranger Doug.
Delighted to
welcome.
Be here. Thank you. Always great to be back. A stellar, outstanding museum and everything in it that we love, and great people.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Very kind. Is the 1980s revival of Western music still going strong?
It's back down some from the peak that it hit. And it was an exciting time, the middle 80s, the early 90s. It really felt like it was coming back strong. I think it's settled back into a little more of a fractional and not quite as much a national movement as it had been. But I think that the seed was planted in those days that will make this music survive, where in those days we felt it was in danger of just being completely forgotten. And I don't think that's true anymore. I think it's found its niche and is continuing to be recognized. And seeing all those young people at the show today, that's just a thrill that next generation's getting introduced to it.
In the book you mentioned the transition from cowboy songs to Western songs. Is there a true distinction between Western music and country music today?
Oh, there's a huge distinction in my mind. Maybe that's the only mind it's in. There's an interesting, the way that all came about, that's just a strictly invented record company term. And I know a lot of people still use it, and it drives people in the country music industry crazy. When they started making records, and targeting audiences, things that weren't popular or classical or marches, what do we call it? Well, we'll call it hillbilly. No matter if it's cowboy, if it's fiddle tunes, if it's love songs, we'll just call it hillbilly. If a black performer did it, we'll call it race. It's a race record, so you'll know what you're buying. Well, they decided both those terms were kind of offensive after a while, so they backpedaled a little bit, and in the 40s, they started calling them country and Western. Country for the, the more southeastern music, and Western because that's what was so popular in the 30s, and Gene Autry and Roy Rogers were, international superstars. And the race records, they started calling those rhythm and blues. Eventually those terms have gone out of style, but people still cling to those terms for some reason. I hear it all the time, I love your guys' country and Western music. And it's meant as a compliment, and I appreciate it. But to me, there's very little country and a whole lot of Western in it. Although, you can make the case, and I think it's a fair one, that if you think of country music as a big tent music, then it does include Western, and it includes folk, and it includes Cajun, and it includes country blues, and a lot of little different subsets or sub-styles of music. And Western music is one of those little wedges of the pie.
What was border radio, and how did it affect the popularity of Western music in the 1930s?
Border radio, for those who don't know what it was, is when they divided up the airwaves and decided who will get what channel. Canada and the United States took them all, and Mexico didn't get any, which was something of an oversight when you come to the North American market. So in order to reach people in the United States, they would set up stations just across the Rio Grande, and there was no limit, as the United States and Canada had agreed to 50,000 watt. So they would have 100,000 watt, 150,000 watt, 200,000 watt. You could hear them in your fillings, you know. You could hear those stations all the way to Alaska. And because they were beaming to the United States, there was, of course, some Mexican programming, but there was also a lot of country and cowboy and hillbilly and Western entertainment. The Carter family spent several years on border radio, and it just boomed this music all across America and introduced it to thousands and thousands of people from, Pennsylvania and Idaho, and who might never have heard it.
So it was widely influential then.
Extremely influential, yeah.
Mid-30s then.
Mm-hmm, yep. They eventually came to terms with the Mexican government and their federal communications department, and they toned down the border radio stations.
Doug, did the popularity of silent film cowboy heroes like Tom Mix help create the strong public interest in Western songs, or was it the appearance of the musical Western?
It was the music of Gene Autry and the people, Tex Ritter, who followed in Gene's footsteps. They were influenced by Tom Mix and the Silent Cowboys. That's, of course, who their heroes were. Dale Evans, in fact, often used to laugh and say that I've always wanted to marry Tom Mix when I grew up, because he was the big thing when she was a little girl. She ended up with Roy Rogers, of course. Well, it's not a bad second.
How is the Grand Ole Opry and the rest of Nashville recovering from the flood of 2010?
It was pretty devastating. The pictures don't even show how bad it was. I feel real bad for guys that I know, like Brad Paisley and Vince Gill, who lost scores of guitars. There was a huge warehouse. Why they put it 3 blocks from the river, I'll never know. But just hundreds and hundreds of guitars were destroyed. And one of mine was at the Grand Ole Opry House, but nothing old and rare. I didn't keep anything rare out there. But the damage to buildings, and of course that Opry Mall that still hasn't even reopened. I mean, there's a lot of recovery the city is doing and still has to do. But the Grand Ole Opry House has been restored beautifully, and among the 18 dressing rooms back there, there's one called the Cowboy Way. And that we walked in and saw that, and man, I just fell on the floor. Pictures of us and Ernest Tubb and Tex Ritter and Gene and Roy. It was just Pee Wee King. Oh yeah, they know, they remember us. They're taking care of us.
Riders in the Sky has recorded a lot of music for children. Has this been the secret to your youthfulness?
It must be. We've always we saw people bringing their kids from the very early shows. Even when we were just doing funky little clubs and bars, where every band gets its start, people would be bringing their kids, and we said, we remember how we felt about Gene and Roy and Hopalong Cassidy and watching them on TV and going to the movies, and we need to be that kind of. We can be silly, but we need to have that kind of influence on the next generation of little kids. And now, of course, we're getting grown men who come up to us with a little kid. Hey, hello. Hey, remember me? I was on stage with you in '84, and you say, no. Well, this is my daughter. We're seeing the whole next generation come around, and I'd say that's one of the 2 or 3 most rewarding things about this career is having watched that happen.
Well, Ranger Doug, thank you for taking the time. It's been a long day, but thank you for taking the time after your concert tonight to speak with us.
My pleasure. Wish I could have gotten here earlier, but I'm glad to be here at all. Thank you.
Folks, join us again soon for another National Cowboy Museum podcast. I'm looking forward to seeing you again.
This podcast is a companion to our quarterly publication, Persimmon Hill Magazine. It's a great resource for keeping you in touch with our great Western heritage and is available by subscription. Visit nationalcowboymuseum.org for details. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.